I need you to picture something for me. It's a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the light comes through the kitchen windows, all gold and soft, and the coffee is hot, and everything looks exactly like your life is supposed to look. And then Alexa speaks, that cheerful little chime, the same sound she makes when she confirms your grocery order, when she sets a timer for your sweet potato pie, when she tells you it's 64 degrees in Charlotte and have a beautiful day. Your order has been confirmed. Estimated delivery Thursday between noon and 4 p.m. I hadn't said a word to that device. I hadn't ordered a single thing. My hands were already shaking when I opened the Amazon app, and when I saw what had been purchased, charged to our joint account shipping to an address I had never seen in my life, the coffee mug slipped right out of my fingers. I didn't even hear it hit the floor. One solid oak burial casket, $1,247, gone. My name is Dominique Reeves Carter. I'm 38 years old. I design security systems for a living. I built every inch of the smart home that just ordered a coffin behind my back. And when I looked up from that screen, my husband was standing in the kitchen doorway, smiling at me like he hadn't done a thing wrong in his life. Drop your city and your local time right now. I want to know who's here with me for this one. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because what I'm about to tell you is the kind of story that will make you walk through your own house differently tonight. Now, let me take you back to where this really started. Before I tell you about the coffin, I need to tell you about the house, because the house is where everything begins, and the house is where everything ends. I bought the property on Delwood Drive in Dilworth back in 2017, a 3-bedroom craftsman bungalow with original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch, and bones so good my contractor said it only twice before he started crying happy tears. I was 33 years old. I had saved for 6 years. I had a down payment of $41,000 sitting in a high-yield savings account that I built dollar by dollar on a senior IT security analyst salary working for Meridian Financial Group downtown. I did it by myself, before Marcus, before the ring, before any of it. That matters. Remember that. I grew up in West Charlotte, the youngest of 3 girls, raised by a woman who worked double shifts at Carolina's Medical Center for 22 years and never once complained about being tired. My mother taught me 2 things above everything else. She said, Dominique, your brain is your inheritance. And she said, never let anybody make you feel small for knowing what you know. I took both of those things seriously. By the time I was 38, I had spent 15 years in cybersecurity. I understood firewalls, network intrusion data, encryption, digital forensics. I had consulted on federal compliance cases. I had testified as an expert witness in 2 corporate litigation trials. My colleagues called me sharp. My clients called me thorough.
My boss, Regional Director Gerald Huang at Meridian, called me the most detail-oriented analyst on his team.
And I had wired every single room of that craftsman bungalow on Delwood Drive into one of the most sophisticated residential smart home systems in Dilworth. I'm not being modest when I say that. I designed it myself. Every Alexa device, every smart lock, every security camera, every automated lighting circuit, I mapped it, I installed it, I tested it. The system ran on a private network with its own encrypted router. I knew that house the way a pianist knows their instrument, by feel, by instinct, by the sound it made when something was even slightly off. That irony is not lost on me, believe me. I met Marcus Carter at a charity gala in Uptown Charlotte in the spring of 2018. He was tall, well-dressed, and he laughed at my joke about enterprise software before I even finished the punchline, which, if you know anything about enterprise software jokes, means he was either genuinely funny or genuinely trying. Either way, I was interested. Marcus was a financial advisor, independent practice boutique clientele, the kind of work that sounds impressive at dinner parties and is considerably less stable than it sounds. But he carried himself with a confidence I mistook for security. He was 41 to my 34. He had broad shoulders and a warm laugh, and he called me brilliant on our 3rd date in a way that made me feel seen rather than flattered. There is a difference, and I thought I knew which one it was. We dated for 2 years. We got married in October of 2020 at a small ceremony in the garden of the Duke Mansion. 40 guests, white roses, my mother crying through the entire vows. Marcus stood at that altar and looked at me like I was the only person on earth. I believed every second of it. He moved into the house on Delwood Drive, my house. His name went on the mortgage the following spring, because that is what you do when you build a life with someone. You let them in. You hand them the keys. I handed him the keys to everything. The first 2 years of our marriage were good. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. The good years are what make the bad years so disorienting. We had a routine that felt like home. Saturday mornings, Marcus made omelets and I made coffee, and we sat on the wraparound porch and talked about nothing in particular for hours. He called me his favorite person. He came to my work presentations and sat in the back row and texted me afterward that room had no idea who they were dealing with. He told anyone who would listen that his wife was basically a superhero, and he said it with a pride that felt real. He was good at making things feel real. I should introduce you to Kezia Thornton because Kezia is important to this story in ways neither of us fully understood at the time. Kezia and I met freshman year at UNC Charlotte, bonded over a shared hatred of our statistics professor, and have been inseparable in the way that only certain friendships manage to be. The kind where you can go 3 weeks without talking and pick up exactly where you left off. She is a forensic accountant with a firm in South End. She is 6 feet tall. She has exactly 0 patience for nonsense. And she is the most perceptive person I have ever known. Kezia never fully warmed to Marcus. She was polite. Kezia is always polite, but she had a way of watching him that I noticed and chose to ignore. Once, about a year into the marriage, she said to me over wine, "Dom, I love you, so I'm going to say this once and then leave it alone. That man asks about your work a lot, like a lot, more than a supportive husband, more than a curious husband. It's a specific kind of a lot, and I don't have a name for it yet." I told her she was projecting. I told her not every man who asks about his wife's career is threatened by it. I told her Marcus was my biggest supporter. She nodded, refilled her glass, and left it alone, like she said she would. I wish I had listened. Lord, I wish I had listened. Now here is something else you need to know because it becomes critical later. About 8 months into our marriage, Marcus asked me to help him add a new Alexa speaker to our home network. He said he wanted one in the bedroom, better sound quality for his sleep playlists, he said. He sat right next to me on the couch while I walked him through the setup process on the app. Device name, network connection permissions, account linking. I set it up myself, handed it back to him, kissed him on the cheek. He smiled and said, "Thank you, baby." I thought nothing of it, less than nothing. It was a Tuesday evening and I had a conference call in 40 minutes and my mind was already elsewhere. But that was the evening everything changed. I just did not know it yet. The other person you need to know about is Priya Nair. She'd been at Meridian Financial Group for 3 years when I first really noticed her sharp, polished, the kind of colleague who always seemed to have the right answer slightly before everyone else in the room. She sat 2 rows from me in the open floor plan. She wore structured blazers and kept a clean desk, and she smiled at me warmly every single morning. "Good morning, Dom. Love that jacket. Hey, what are you working on this week?" Every morning, without fail. I thought she was friendly. I thought she was ambitious in the way ambitious women are, which I respect and have always respected. I thought she was someone worth knowing. There was a promotion on the table that fall, Chief Information Security Officer. The first time in Meridian's 30-year history the position had opened at the senior level. I had been building toward that role for 3 years.
Gerald had told me privately twice that I was the strongest internal candidate he had seen.
I was ready. I knew I was ready. And then on a Wednesday morning in November, Gerald called a department meeting and announced that the position had been awarded to Priya Nair. The room offered polite applause. I sat very still with my hands folded on the table and my face arranged into something I hoped looked professional. Gerald caught my eye briefly and said only,
"We had some concerns about certain communications, Dominique. We'll talk."
Certain communications. I turned that phrase over in my mind for days. I had no idea what it meant. I did not yet understand that someone had been feeding Meridian's leadership a very carefully curated version of me. A version built from my own words, recorded in my own home without my knowledge or consent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the version of Marcus Carter that I fell in love with, because I think you need to understand him the way I understood him before everything or none of what comes next will make complete sense. Marcus had a gift, and I mean that in the most dangerous way possible. He had the gift of making you feel like the most important person in whatever room you were both standing in. Not in a performative way, not in the way that sets off alarm bells. In the quiet, specific way, the way he remembered that you took your coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar after you'd mentioned it exactly once 6 months ago. The way he'd reach over in the middle of a movie and squeeze your hand for no reason. The way he'd say, "Tell me more about that," when you talked about work, and actually lean in and actually listen. Or what I believed was listening. Saturday mornings were our time. That wraparound porch on Delwood Drive, 2 mugs of coffee, the sound of the neighborhood waking up around us. We'd sit out there for 2, sometimes 3 hours just talking. About our childhoods, about money, about what we wanted the next 10 years to look like. Marcus would stretch his long legs out on the porch railing and say things like,
"I just want you to be happy, Dom. That's genuinely all I want."
And I believed him. I believed him the way you believe the weather forecast, not because you verified it, but because you have no particular reason not to. He came to every work presentation I had during that first year, sat in the back, sent me a text the moment it was over. He introduced me at dinner parties as
the most dangerous woman in any room, because she's also the smartest.
He bought me a first edition copy of a cybersecurity memoir I'd mentioned wanting once, wrapped it in brown paper, left it on my desk with a note that said only,
"For the woman who protects everyone else. Somebody's got to protect her, too."
I kept that note in my nightstand drawer for 2 years. I found it again recently. I threw it in the trash without reading it twice. Now, the cracks. They were small at first, so small I genuinely questioned whether I would have noticed them even if I'd been looking, which I wasn't because I was busy and because I was in love, and because love has a way of softening your peripheral vision. The first thing I noticed, and I want to be precise here because the precision matters, was that Marcus started asking about my work differently. Not more necessarily, differently. There was a shift sometime around month 8 or 9 of our marriage. His questions became more specific. Less "how was your day" and more,
"What exactly did Gerald say about the compliance review? Walk me through what happens when you flag a security breach internally."
He framed it as fascination, as pride.
"Baby, I just love hearing how your mind works."
I told Kezia it was sweet. She gave me that look. I ignored the look. The second thing, and this one I remember with uncomfortable clarity, happened on a Friday evening in February. I was on the back patio on a phone call with my attorney, Simone Okafor, going over a clause in my employment contract regarding intellectual property ownership. Standard stuff, but important. I was out there maybe 20 minutes. When I came back inside, Marcus was in the kitchen. He looked up from his phone and said perfectly casually,
"Everything okay with the IP clause?"
I stopped walking. "How did you know I was talking about an IP clause?" He smiled, tapped his ear.
"Babe, the window was open. I could hear you a little. Don't worry about it."
The window was not open. I remembered closing it specifically because it had been cold that evening, barely 48 degrees Fahrenheit outside. I stood there for a moment. Something small and cold moved through me. And then I let it go, because that is what I did back then. I collected small, cold moments and then I let them go because the alternative sitting with what they might mean felt like more than I could afford. That was my flaw. Not stupidity, not naivety. A specific chosen willingness to look away from things that scared me. I grew up watching my parents' marriage fall apart, and I had promised myself that I would not be a woman who destroyed a good thing with suspicion. So whenever suspicion showed up, I escorted it right back out the door. Marcus knew that about me. I understand now that he counted on it. Now I need to tell you about the BBQ. Because the BBQ is when I first saw the other Marcus, the one that lived underneath the attentive husband, the one he only let out when he thought the audience was safe. It was a Saturday in late July. Our neighbors, Darnell and Patrice, hosted their annual backyard cookout. Maybe 30 people, good music, somebody's uncle on the grill, taking it personally. Marcus and I had been there about an hour when Marcus's friend group pulled him into a corner of the yard. His boys, Deshaun Malik, a couple of others I knew by face but not well. I was standing maybe 15 feet away talking to Patrice, but I could hear them clearly. Deshaun said something about his wife's job, made some joke about her earning more than him, and the group laughed. And then Marcus, my husband, my biggest supporter, the man who called me the most dangerous woman in any room, shook his head and said loud enough for that entire corner of the yard to hear.
Man, I feel that. Dom's out here saving the whole company every day.
He paused, let the next part land.
She fixes their computers and calls it cybersecurity. I love her, but let's be real, it's glorified IT support.
The group laughed again. Deshaun said, "At least she's fine, though," and they moved on. Patrice had gone very still beside me. She touched my arm once lightly and said nothing. I kept my face completely neutral. I picked up my cup and took a slow sip of lemonade, and I did not look in Marcus's direction for the next 45 minutes. Later that night in the car on the way home, I told him what I had heard. He looked genuinely surprised. Then he laughed, not unkindly, which was somehow worse.
Baby, that was just guy talk. You know I'm proud of you. Don't make it into something it's not.
Guy talk. I filed it away. I added it to the small cold collection. And I drove the rest of the way home in silence, watching the Charlotte streetlights slide across the windshield and telling myself it was nothing. It was not nothing. But I'm telling you all of this because 3 weeks after that cookout, something happened that I could not explain away, could not file, could not let go of. I was in the living room on a Sunday evening reading. Marcus was in the bedroom. Every device in the house was on its normal overnight idle screens, dimmed, no active commands, no music playing. And then Alexa spoke, not with a chime, not with a weather update. She spoke in my own voice. A fragment, maybe 4 seconds of me on a phone call. My voice mid-sentence saying, "The terms of the non-disclosure specifically cover internal communications, Simone," which means if they try to use that in the review, and then silence. I sat up straight. My book hit the floor. I walked to the Alexa device on the bookshelf and stood in front of it and stared at it like it had just introduced itself as something I had never seen before. Because it had. Alexa does not record your private phone calls. Alexa does not play them back unprompted on a Sunday evening. That is not a feature. That is not a glitch. That is not the wind coming through a window that was never open. Something was wrong with my house. Something was very, very wrong with my house. I want you to understand something about what it feels like to suspect your own home. Not your husband, not yet, your home. The place you designed from the ground up. The place you know better than you know your own handwriting. When that place suddenly feels like it is keeping secrets from you, there is a specific kind of vertigo that comes with it. Not dizziness exactly, more like the ground beneath you is still there, but you are no longer completely certain it is solid. I stood in front of that Alexa device for a long time that Sunday evening. Marcus came out of the bedroom, eventually saw me standing there and said,
"You good?"
I told him yes. I told him Alexa had done something weird. He glanced at the device, shrugged, said,
"Those things malfunction all the time, babe."
And went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I watched him walk away, and I thought he did not ask what it did. Most people, if you told them your smart device just did something strange, would ask what it did. That is the natural human response, curiosity. Marcus did not ask. He explained it away before I could describe it. I filed that too. My collection was getting heavy. The next morning, I did what I do. I went to work. I sat at my desk. And at lunch, instead of eating, I opened the Alexa app on my phone and navigated to the activity log. Now, most people who own Alexa devices know there is an activity log. It shows you every time the device was activated, every wake word, every command, every interaction. Most people check it occasionally to see if their device is misbehaving. I had checked mine exactly twice in 3 years because I built the system and I trusted the system and I had no reason to look. I had a reason now. I scrolled back 3 months. And what I found made the lunch I hadn't eaten feel like a mercy. There were hundreds of activations I did not recognize. Not dozens, hundreds. Entries with no corresponding command. Entries labeled simply audio recording with timestamps in the middle of the night, early morning, mid-afternoon. Timestamps that corresponded when I cross-referenced them in my memory to phone calls I had made in various rooms of that house. Conversations with Simone. Conversations with Kezia. Conversations with Gerald about the CISO position. One entry from a Thursday evening in April, timestamped at 7:43 p.m., that I recognized immediately as the night I had called my father and cried for 40 minutes about being passed over for the promotion. My hands stopped moving over the phone screen. I sat at my desk in the open floor plan of Meridian Financial Group, surrounded by the low hum of keyboards and climate control, and I felt something shift in my chest that I can only describe as the specific pain of realizing the lock you trusted most was never actually locked. I exported the activity log to my personal encrypted drive. All of it. Every entry, every timestamp, every audio fragment the app would allow me to access. I did it methodically, the way I had been trained to preserve digital evidence, and I did not let my hands shake until I was in the parking garage walking to my car. Then I sat in the driver's seat and I shook for a full 5 minutes before I could start the engine. I called Kezia from the road. "Kez, I need you to come over tonight." She heard something in my voice that required no further explanation. "I'll be there at 7. But first I had to go home, and Marcus was already there when I arrived. He was in the kitchen making pasta music, playing perfectly domestic. He kissed me on the cheek when I walked in, asked about my day, poured me a glass of sparkling water without being asked because he knew I preferred it after work. Everything was exactly as it always was, except I was looking at it differently now. I kept my face neutral. I had been doing that for months without realizing it, arranging my expression into something acceptable, something that would not invite questions. But this time, I was doing it on purpose. This time, it was a choice. I sat at the kitchen island and I watched him cook, and I thought about every specific detail of the activity log, and I waited. Kezia arrived at 7:15. Marcus greeted her warmly at the door, he always did, regardless of the temperature between them, and then made himself scarce in the bedroom with his laptop, which he always did when Kezia came over, which I had always appreciated and now understood differently. I showed Kezia the log on my phone. She scrolled through it without speaking for a long time. Then she put the phone down on the kitchen island very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands need a moment, and she looked at me and said, "Dom, this is not a malfunction." "I know." "This is deliberate." "I know." "You need to find out where these recordings went." That was the question I had been turning over since the parking garage. The activity log showed me that recordings had been made. It did not show me where they had gone. For that, I needed to go deeper into the device configuration, into the network traffic logs, into the back-end architecture of the system I had built myself. I spent the next 3 evenings doing exactly that after Marcus went to sleep. What I found on the 3rd evening was the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew. Buried in the device settings, invisible to any standard user, only accessible through the developer interface, I happened to know how to navigate because I had built. The system was an Alexa skill I had not installed. It had no display name. It had no icon. It had a registration date of April 14th, 2022, 14 months earlier, 2 weeks after Marcus had asked me to help him set up the bedroom speaker. The skill was not from Amazon. It was a third-party integration, registered through a developer account I did not recognize. It had one function to activate on voice detection record audio. In segments, classify the segments by keyword and forward them automatically to an external email address. I stared at that email address for a long time. I copied it. I searched it. The domain was registered to a consulting firm called CN Advisory Group, LLC, incorporated in North Carolina, registered address in Ballantyne. The same neighborhood as the address on the Coffin order. My stomach dropped so hard and so fast I had to press both palms flat on the desk to stay upright. I searched CN Advisory Group, LLC in the North Carolina Business Registry. 2 registered agents. Marcus Darnell Carter, and Priya Sunita Nair. The room went very quiet. Not the house quiet I was used to, the particular quiet of 2 a.m. with the climate control humming and the neighborhood sleeping. This was a different quiet, the kind that lives inside your skull when something you cannot unhear has just been said. Priya, my colleague, my morning greeter, my good morning Dom. Love that jacket. Hey, what are you working on this week? They were business partners. They had been business partners for over a year. They had built a company together in the same neighborhood where Marcus had shipped a coffin on my credit card for a woman I now understood was Priya's mother. He had used our joint account to pay for his business partner's mother's funeral, while lying to my face about a client cancellation. I was still sitting there perfectly still, hands flat on the desk, when my phone lit up with a text from Marcus from the bedroom down the hall.
I know you've been going through my things, Dominique. We need to talk in the morning.
I looked at that message for a long time. Then I forwarded every single file I had collected to my personal encrypted cloud backup, shut the laptop, and walked to the bedroom doorway. Marcus was lying in bed, phone face down on his chest, eyes closed, performing sleep poorly. I stood in that doorway and I looked at the man I had married, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not devastation, not rage, not yet. Clarity. Cold, absolute surgical clarity. And I thought he thinks he has the advantage because he has been watching me. He does not understand yet that I just found the camera. The morning after I found the skill, Marcus was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. Dressed, coffee made, 2 mugs on the counter, which was either a peace offering or a performance. With Marcus, I had learned those 2 things were rarely different. He waited until I sat down. Then he folded his hands on the island like a man about to chair a board meeting and said,
I think you've been under a lot of stress lately, Dom. The promotion thing hit you harder than you're admitting. And I think that stress is making you see things that aren't there.
That was it. No acknowledgement of his text from the night before. No explanation. Just a clean, confident reframe. Your perception is the problem, not my behavior. Delivered with the calm of someone who had rehearsed it. I looked at him over my coffee mug. What things am I seeing that aren't there, Marcus?
You've been going through my laptop, my phone, the Alexa settings. Kezia's got you all wound up and you're building a conspiracy out of software glitches.
He shook his head slowly, almost sadly.
You're a security analyst, babe. Occupational hazard, right? You start seeing threats everywhere.
He said it gently, almost tenderly, like he was diagnosing me out of genuine concern. And here is what I need you to understand about gaslighting, because I think people use that word without understanding what it actually feels like from the inside. It does not feel like being lied to. It feels like being slowly, carefully untethered from your own perception. It feels like standing on ground you measured yourself and being told with great patience and great kindness that your measurements are wrong. For a fraction of a second, less than a second, a splinter of a second, I felt it work. That tiny loosening, that flicker of, am I making this bigger than it is? And then I thought about the developer interface, the registration date, the 2 names on the business registry. I smiled at him. You're probably right, I said. I'll try to decompress this weekend. He visibly relaxed, reached over and squeezed my hand.
That's my girl.
I picked up my coffee and said nothing else. That was the last morning I was ever uncertain about Marcus Carter. What followed over the next 2 weeks was a masterclass in what happens when a man realizes his control is slipping and decides to tighten his grip rather than examine his behavior. Marcus became more watchful, more present in a way that felt less like love and more like supervision. He started asking where I was going when I left the house. He texted me at odd intervals during the workday, not hey, thinking of you texts, but where are you right now texts. He started commenting on my phone usage.
You're always on that thing. Who are you talking to?
Meanwhile, Kezia had pulled our joint bank statements going back 26 months. What she found was methodical and patient and deeply deliberate. Every month, without fail, between $1,800 and $3,000 transferred from our joint account to an external account. Never the same amount twice, never on the same date, staggered just enough to avoid pattern detection by a casual observer. Over 26 months, the total came to $61,000. $61,000. Gone. From an account that held my savings, my emergency fund, the money I had been quietly setting aside toward a rental property I wanted to buy in Noda within the next 2 years. When Kezia told me the number, I was sitting in her car outside a Starbucks on South Boulevard. I remember looking at the dashboard and thinking about how long it had taken me to save that kind of money. The double shifts I had covered. The vacations I had not taken. The way I had packed lunch every single day for 3 years at Meridian because I was serious about building something real. $61,000. Gone. To a company he co-owned with the woman who had taken my promotion. I called Simone Okafor that afternoon from Kezia's car. I told her I needed an appointment as soon as possible. She said she could see me Thursday. I said I needed Wednesday. She said she could do Wednesday at noon. I was there at 11:45. Now, I need to tell you about what happened at dinner that Wednesday night because this is where I need you to really see Marcus Carter for who he is. Not the man with the warm laugh and the first edition books and the Saturday morning porch coffee. The other one. The one he stopped bothering to hide once he felt threatened. I came home from Simone's office and I was quiet through dinner. I was processing. I was being careful. But Marcus had spent 2 weeks watching me closely enough that he could read my quiet the way I could read network anomalies by what was absent rather than what was present. He put his fork down midway through the meal and looked at me across the table and said,
"You went to see a lawyer today, didn't you?"
It was not a question. I said nothing. Something moved across his face then. Something I had never seen there before or maybe had seen and refused to name. A cold, flat anger. Like a door opening onto a room you did not know was in the house.
"You want to know what your problem is, Dom?"
His voice was perfectly level.
"You're terrified of being alone. I know that about you. You've known it about yourself since you were a little girl watching your parents fall apart."
The air went out of the room, because I had never told Marcus that. Not in those words. Not with that specific framing, a little girl watching your parents fall apart. I had talked about my parents' divorce in general terms. I had never described it that way. Not to him. That exact language, a little girl watching her parents fall apart, I had used exactly once. On a Thursday evening in October, on the phone with my father crying after the promotion had gone to Priya. When I had sat on the back porch in the dark and told my father that I was scared, my marriage was in trouble, and I did not know how to fix it, and I was so afraid of ending up alone. Marcus had heard that call. He had listened to it. He had filed it away. And now he was using my most private, most painful moment as a weapon at the dinner table, like it was nothing. Like it cost him nothing. He leaned forward slightly and said,
"You don't have it in you to leave. And somewhere underneath all this paranoia, you know that. So why don't you stop playing detective and come back to your marriage?"
I looked at him across the table. I looked at the man who had stood at that altar at the Duke Mansion and sworn to protect me in front of 40 people and my crying mother. And I felt the last thread of doubt dissolve completely, not into rage, not into tears, into something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. The part of me that had been making excuses, collecting small, cold moments and letting them go, softening my peripheral vision out of love or fear or both, that part went completely silent. He must have seen something change in my face because he sat back slightly.
"Nobody at that company respects you. You know, they tolerate you. There is a difference. Priya got that position because she knows how to work with people. You know how to work with machines. That's not the same thing."
He stood up and carried his plate to the sink like he had just commented on the weather. I sat at that table for a long time after he left the room. Then I picked up my phone and texted Kezia 4 words. "I'm ready, let's go." There is a specific kind of grief that has no name in the English language. I have looked for it. The grief that comes not from losing something, but from realizing it was never what you thought it was. Not a death, a revision. Going back through every memory you own and understanding that the thing you were remembering was a construction, a set, props and lighting arranged by someone who knew exactly what you needed to see. That is what the week after that dinner felt like. I want to walk you through what I found because the details matter. Not for shock value, but because the details are what make it real and real is what makes it survivable. You cannot heal from something you have not fully looked at. On a Saturday morning, Marcus was at the gym 2 hours predictable as weather. I sat down at my home office desk with the full exported data set from the Alexa activity log, the network traffic records I had pulled from our router's administrative backend, and a fresh legal pad. I worked the way I work a security breach at Meridian. Methodically. No assumptions. Follow the data where it goes, not where you want it to go. The Alexa skill I had found was sophisticated. Whoever had built it, and I had a name now, I had 2 names, but I needed to understand the architecture before I confronted anyone, had designed it to be nearly invisible to standard user review. It activated on a short list of trigger keywords: lawyer, contract, promotion, Gerald, Meridian, breach, compliance, project. When those words were detected, it recorded the surrounding audio in 30-second segments. It stored nothing locally. It compressed and forwarded everything in real time to the external email account registered to CN Advisory Group, LLC. 2 years of my professional life, every strategy conversation, every legal consultation, every late-night call with Kezia where I talked through what I was working on at Meridian, every moment I had spent in my own home thinking I was safe. All of it forwarded in real time. I sat with that for a moment. Then I kept working. I traced the forwarding path through the network logs and confirmed what I already suspected. The data had been leaving my home network consistently since April of 2022. Not occasionally, not sporadically. Every single triggered recording sent within minutes of capture to the CN Advisory Group email domain. Then I opened a separate folder and went through the audio fragments the app had allowed me to download. I found the one labeled D-Lawyer Simone March, 31 minutes long. My conversation with Simone about the IP clause in my employment contract. The one Marcus had somehow known about from a window that was not open. I pressed play and listened to my own voice for 31 minutes and felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. Then I found the one labeled D. Gerald CISO October, 18 minutes. Me and my boss on the phone discussing my candidacy for the Chief Information Security Officer position.
Dominique, you are the strongest internal candidate we've seen.
Me asking about timeline.
I expect a decision by the end of November.
End of November. Priya had been announced in mid-November, 2 weeks early, because someone had told her what to prepare for. Someone had given her the timeline, the criteria, the language Gerald was using internally to evaluate candidates. Someone had handed her a roadmap built entirely from my own words recorded in my own home, and she had used it to walk straight past me into the role I had spent 3 years building toward. I pressed my palms flat on the desk, the same way I had in the parking garage. Grounding technique, something my therapist had taught me years ago for moments when the floor felt uncertain. The floor felt very uncertain, but I was not done. Because there was one more file I needed to find, and I had been circling it for 3 days without opening it. The one labeled D-Father Call October, 43 minutes. I pressed play. I will not describe to you in detail what it sounds like to hear yourself crying in a way you thought was private, in a way you believed was between you and your father and nobody else on earth. I will only tell you that I listened to all 43 minutes. I listened to myself say things about fear and loneliness and the specific terror of repeating your parents' mistakes that I had never said out loud to another living soul except my father and my God. And I thought about Marcus at the dinner table.
You're terrified of being alone. You've known it about yourself since you were a little girl watching your parents fall apart. You don't have it in you to leave.
Word for word, thought for thought. My own most private pain extracted, cataloged, and deployed against me at the dinner table like a tool. That is when the grief I told you about, the one with no name, arrived completely. The truth didn't just hurt. It gutted me. Like someone reached inside my chest and rearranged everything in there and put it back in the wrong order. 12 months of marriage that I had believed in. 12 months of Saturday mornings and first edition books, and you are the most dangerous woman in any room. All of it filtered now through the understanding that he had been listening the entire time. That every moment of apparent intimacy had been also a moment of data collection. that the man who knew me best had been using what he knew as ammunition from the very beginning. I closed the laptop. I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water and I drank all of it standing at the sink, looking out the window at the backyard. At the garden I had planted the first spring after we got married. The hydrangeas along the back fence that were Marcus's supposed favorite. The porch furniture we had picked out together at a shop on Providence Road. I thought none of it was what I thought it was. And then, and this is the part I need you to hear, I thought, but the house is still mine. The data is still mine. The evidence is still mine. The expertise is still mine. Everything he used against me, he only had access to because I built it. And everything I built, I understand better than he ever will. I was still standing at that sink when I heard the front door open. Marcus back from the gym bag over one shoulder, earbuds, and completely at ease. He stopped when he saw my face. Something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, Marcus Carter did not do guilt. Something more calculated. A reassessment. He pulled out one earbud and looked at me the way a chess player looks at the board when they suspect their opponent has found a move they didn't anticipate.
So, you found something?
Not a denial. Not an apology. Not even a question, really. A statement. An acknowledgement delivered with the flat confidence of a man who had already decided it did not matter.
So what? What are you going to do about it? Dom, go to a lawyer. Go ahead. You think anyone is going to believe that a smart home system was used to spy on you? You think that story doesn't make you sound like exactly the kind of paranoid, unstable person I've been telling people you've become?
He had been telling people. Past tense. He had already been building the narrative, preparing the audience.
I've been very patient with you, but I need you to understand something. You cannot win this. You don't have the stomach for it, and you definitely don't have the resources. So let's skip the part where you embarrass yourself and get back to the part where we work on this marriage.
He picked up his gym bag and walked down the hallway to the bedroom. I stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment after he disappeared. And somewhere in the distance, something in me went very quiet. Not sad quiet, not scared quiet. The other kind. I want to tell you about the moment I stopped being afraid. Not the moment I got angry. Anger came later, and it came clean and useful the way anger is supposed to come when it finally arrives at the right time. What came first standing at that kitchen sink after Marcus walked down the hallway was something quieter and more fundamental than anger. Something that felt less like an emotion and more like a recalibration. Like a system that had been running corrupted code for 2 years, finally completing a hard reset. I stood there for maybe 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the microwave. Then I picked up my phone and called Simone Okafor. It was a Saturday. Simone answered on the 3rd ring, which tells you everything you need to know about Simone Okafor. I said. He knows I found it. He's not scared. He thinks he's untouchable. Simone was quiet for exactly 2 seconds.
Good. Scared people make mistakes trying to cover their tracks. Untouchable people make mistakes because they stop paying attention. Come to my office Monday morning, 7 a.m. Bring everything.
I said, Simone, is this just a divorce?
Dominique, what he built in your house, the recording, the forwarding, the systematic interception of your private communications, that is a violation of the Federal Wiretap Act. That is a violation of the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And depending on what he and Priya Nair did with that information at Meridian, we may be looking at corporate espionage statutes as well. So no, this is not just a divorce.
I hung up and stood in my kitchen for another moment. Then I walked to my home office, closed the door quietly, and sat down at my desk. I opened a fresh document on my personal encrypted laptop. Not the work machine, not the shared home computer, my personal machine that Marcus had never touched and did not know the password to. And I started making a list. Not a list of grievances. Not a list of everything I had lost or everything he had taken. A list of assets. What I had, what I could prove. What I could build into something a federal court could use. Because here is what Marcus Carter had failed to understand about me in 2 years of listening to my private conversations. He had heard my fears. He had heard my doubts. He had heard me cry about my parents and worry about my marriage and second-guess myself in the dark. But he had never once heard me work. He had never heard me in the mode I enter when there is a breach to investigate and a system to protect and a clear objective in front of me. He heard the woman who was afraid of being alone. He did not hear the analyst who had testified in federal court, who had traced network intrusions across 6 time zones, who could read traffic logs the way a musician reads sheet music. He had been surveilling the wrong version of me. Monday morning, I was in Simone's office at 6:58. I had spent the weekend making copies of everything multiple redundant backups on separate encrypted drives, stored in 3 different locations, one of which was a safe deposit box at a Bank of America branch on South Tryon that Marcus did not know existed. I had documented the Alexa skill with forensic precision, screenshots of the developer interface, exported configuration files, network traffic logs showing every transmission, timestamped records of every audio fragment forwarded to the CN Advisory Group domain. I had cross-referenced the transmission timestamps with my calendar and reconstructed a detailed record of exactly which conversations had been captured and when.
Dom, this is one of the most comprehensive digital evidence packages I have seen in 15 years of family law. And I've had clients who were actual forensic investigators.
I am an actual forensic investigator.
Yes, you are.
We spent 3 hours that morning building the framework. Simone would file for divorce with a motion for immediate asset preservation, freezing the joint accounts before Marcus could move anything else. Kezia's financial analysis would support a claim for dissipation of marital assets covering the $61,000. The digital evidence would go to Simone's technology consultant for independent verification, creating a chain of custody that would hold up in court. And critically separately, Simone had a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office who handled electronic surveillance cases.
We are not going to threaten him with the federal angle. We are going to build it quietly, completely, and then present it all at once. He needs to believe he is winning right up until the moment he isn't.
I nodded. He already believes that.
Good, let him.
Now I need to tell you about Kezia, because Kezia did something in this period that I will never forget and never be able to fully repay. While I was building the legal case with Simone, Kezia was running a parallel financial investigation with the precision she brings to every forensic accounting case she touches. She did not just document the $61,000, she traced where it went. CN Advisory Group LLC had a business checking account. That account had made payments to 3 vendors over 26 months. A software development contractor in Raleigh, a cloud storage service, and a marketing firm in Charlotte that specialized in, and I need you to sit with this for a moment, executive personal branding. Priya Nair's personal branding, her LinkedIn, her conference speaking profile, her industry presence that had made her look on paper like the more polished and better connected candidate for the CISO position. Built with my money, funded by transfers from our joint account, paid for by $61,000 that Marcus had bled out of my savings dollar by careful dollar over more than 2 years. When Kezia called me with that piece, I was sitting in my car in the Meridian parking garage. I listened to her explain it. I looked at the concrete pillar in front of my windshield for a long time. Then I said, Kez, he used my money to build the woman who took my promotion. Kezia said, yes. I said, okay. She said, okay, that's all you've got. I said, I needed to hear it out loud. Now I know exactly what I'm fighting for. There is something I did every evening during those 2 weeks that I have not told you about yet. After dinner, after Marcus had retreated to the bedroom or the living room with his laptop and his false sense of security, I would sit at the kitchen island and I would look at the Alexa device on the bookshelf. The device that had betrayed me. The device that had been turned against me in my own home by a man I had trusted with everything. And I would think about what I knew that he did not. I knew the system. I had built it from the ground up. I knew every permission, every integration point, every way in and every way out. I had removed the malicious skill the same night I discovered it carefully, leaving no trace that it was gone, because the last thing I needed was for Marcus to know I had found the exact mechanism. I had replaced it with something of my own design, something quiet, something that would wait. I also knew something else. Something that Simone had discovered through her contact at Meridian's legal department, who had reached out confidentially after Simone made a careful inquiry about the CISO process. Priya Nair was scared. Not nervous. Scared. The kind of scared that makes people call lawyers on weekends and check their email compulsively and start looking for exits before the building is on fire. Because Priya Nair was smart enough to know what the evidence meant for her. And Priya Nair, unlike Marcus, was smart enough to understand when the math had stopped working in her favor.
She wants to meet with you before anything gets filed, before anything goes to HR. She wants to talk.
I looked at Simone across the desk, set it up, and then I went home and I made dinner and I sat across from my husband and I smiled at him over the food he had not cooked. And I listened to him talk about a new client he was developing, and I said all the right things in all the right places. And I thought, enjoy this, Marcus. Enjoy every last second of feeling like you have won. You have no idea what this house is about to tell everyone. I met Priya Nair on a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop on North Davidson Street in Noda. Neutral ground. Public space. I chose the table corner back wall clear sightline to the door. Old habit from security work. You always want to see who is coming before they see you. She was already there when I arrived. That told me something. People who are confident arrive on time or slightly late. People who are scared arrive early and spend the waiting time rehearsing. Priya looked like she had not slept in several days. The structured blazer was there, the professional posture was there, but something underneath all of it had come loose. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she had not drunk from. When she saw me walk in, something moved across her face that I recognized as relief, which struck me as an odd response to the arrival of the person whose life you have spent 2 years systematically dismantling. I sat down. I did not smile. I did not offer pleasantries. I need you to know that I did not understand the full scope of what Marcus was doing when this started. I looked at her. I believed him when he said you shared information with him voluntarily, that you talked through your work with him at home, and he passed things along to help me because She stopped, reorganized. He told me you had an open relationship about work, that you didn't mind. Priya. I know. I need you to stop explaining and start deciding. She looked at her untouched coffee. What are my options? I laid them out the way Simone and I had constructed them, cleanly and without editorializing. Option 1. Priya cooperates fully sworn affidavit detailing the full history of her involvement with CN Advisory Group, the receipt and use of recorded information from my home, and the role that information played in her CISO candidacy. In exchange, I would not pursue civil action against her personally, and Simone would communicate her cooperation to the U.S. Attorney's contact as a mitigating factor. Option 2. Priya does not cooperate. The evidence goes forward without her. She becomes a co-defendant in both the civil case and any federal investigation, and her career in financial services, which requires licensing and regulatory standing, ends permanently. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you were unstable, that you'd been struggling since the promotion, that HR already had concerns about your judgment. He told me the same thing about myself," I said. "Did it occur to you to ask me directly?" She had no answer for that. "The affidavit," I said. "Yes or no?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes." I slid a card across the table, Simone's direct number. "Call her today, not tomorrow, today." I stood up, put on my jacket, and walked out without looking back. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel generous. I felt the way I feel at work when a particularly stubborn breach finally yields to the right approach, a clean, functional satisfaction that has nothing to do with emotion and everything to do with the work being done correctly. Priya called Simone that afternoon. The affidavit was drafted and signed within 72 hours. The first wall had come down. Now let me tell you what Marcus was doing during all of this. Marcus was having, by every outward appearance, the best 2 weeks he'd had in months. A new consulting contract had come through legitimate work, as far as I could tell, a small investment firm in Ballantyne that needed quarterly financial strategy sessions. He was energized. He came home with food from our favorite Jamaican restaurant on Central Avenue. He suggested we take a weekend trip to Asheville. He was in the particular way of people who believe they have successfully neutralized a threat relaxed. He had decided I had backed down. He had watched me go quiet after our confrontation in the kitchen. He had watched me stop asking questions, stop going through his things, stop having Kezia over. He had watched me smile over dinner and ask about his day and respond to his Asheville suggestion with "That sounds really nice, let me check my calendar." And he had concluded with the confidence of a man who had been underestimating me for 2 years that his strategy had worked. On a Thursday evening, he poured 2 glasses of wine and sat next to me on the couch, closer than he had sat in weeks, and said,
I feel like we're getting back to a good place, Dom. I really do.
I looked at him. I let warmth into my eyes the way you let light into a room carefully at a controlled angle. Me too, I said. He lifted his glass.
To getting back to good.
I lifted mine. To getting exactly what we deserve, I said. He smiled and drank. He heard it as agreement. It was not agreement. That same Thursday evening after Marcus fell asleep, I made 3 calls. The first was to Simone. Kezia's financial report was complete, notarized, and ready. The divorce filing with the asset preservation motion was prepared and waiting for my instruction to submit. Simone's contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office had reviewed the digital evidence package and confirmed sufficient basis to open a preliminary inquiry into federal wiretapping violations. The Meridian Legal Department, informed confidentially of the situation by Simone, had opened an internal investigation into the CISO selection process and was prepared to act on its findings. Everything was loaded. Everything was aimed. I just had to choose the moment. The second call was to Gerald Huang, my boss. I told him I needed 30 minutes of his time Friday morning before the building opened.
7 a.m.
I said I'd be there. The third call was to my brother DeAndre in Raleigh. I had not told him everything. I had not told anyone everything except Simone and Kezia, but I told him enough. I told him I needed him to know that I was okay, that I was handling something difficult, and that by next week things were going to look very different. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dom, whatever you need, you know that." I knew that. I had always known that. I had just stopped letting myself lean on it for a while. I want to tell you about Friday morning, about the last version of Marcus Carter I will ever describe to you as a man who felt powerful. He was still asleep when I left the house at 6:30. I stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment before I left. I do not know exactly why, some instinct toward witness, toward remembering, and I looked at him in the gray early light, sleeping on his side of the bed, breathing slowly, completely at peace. I thought about every recording, every forwarded file, every dinner table cruelty delivered with the calm of someone who knew they would not be challenged. Every morning, he had kissed my cheek and asked about my day, while an algorithm in our living room cataloged my answer. And I thought about what he had said on that first terrible morning.
You cannot win this. You don't have the stomach for it.
I buttoned my coat. I picked up my bag. I walked out of that house and locked the door behind me with the key that had my name on the deed. Then I drove to Gerald's office and I put everything on his desk. Gerald read for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up at me over the top of the documents and said,
Dominique, I owe you an apology.
"Yes," I said. "You do, but we can get to that. First, I need to tell you what happens next." That afternoon, Marcus received a certified letter at our home address, delivered by a process server at 2:17 p.m. according to Simone's confirmation text. Divorce filing, asset preservation order, effective immediately. His response came 40 minutes later, a phone call to my cell that I let go to voicemail. I listened to the message once. His voice was tight and high in a way I had never heard it before, not quite controlled, not quite uncontrolled, somewhere in the narrow, frightened space between them. He said,
Dominique, call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. Whatever you think you have, we can work this out privately. Call me back.
Privately. He still thought this could be contained. He still thought the walls of our house were the boundaries of this situation. He had no idea that the house itself had already testified. I did not call him back. I had one more thing to set in motion first. The routine I had installed in the Alexa system 3 weeks earlier, the one designed to activate at a specific time, in a specific way when Marcus was home alone. I opened the app. I looked at the scheduled trigger. I pressed confirm. "Enjoy your last few days," I said quietly to the empty parking garage around me. Then I started the car and drove home to have dinner with my husband for the very last time. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday morning at Simone Okafor's office on South Tryon Street. 14th floor, corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over uptown Charlotte. I had chosen that room specifically. I wanted Marcus to feel the height. Simone had framed the invitation carefully. A mandatory disclosure meeting required by the Asset Preservation Order. Both parties present both attorneys present standard procedure. Marcus's attorney, a man named Bridwell who specialized in high-asset divorce cases and had a reputation for aggressive negotiation, had confirmed attendance. Marcus had confirmed attendance. What neither of them knew was who else would be in that room. I arrived at 9:30. Simone was already there. 2 associates beside her, 4 organized folders on the conference table, coffee service untouched. Kezia was there not as a friend, but in her professional capacity as the forensic accountant, whose analysis was part of the file documentation. Gerald Huang's legal representative from Meridian was there, a quiet woman named Attorney Patricia Voss, who had been handling the internal investigation. And at the far end of the table, looking like she would rather be anywhere else on earth, was Priya Nair, present at Simone's request, her own attorney beside her, her signed affidavit already in evidence. I sat at the center of the table. I folded my hands. I waited. Marcus arrived at 9:58 with Bridwell. He walked into that conference room with the particular energy of a man who had spent the drive over reminding himself that he held the stronger hand, shoulders back, chin level. The warm smile deployed like a tool as he greeted Simone with the practiced ease of someone who had decided charm was still a viable strategy. Then he saw the room. I watched him take it in. Kezia, Attorney Voss from Meridian, Priya, who would not meet his eyes. Something shifted in his posture, barely perceptible. The smile stayed, but the warmth behind it flickered like a light with a loose connection. He sat down across from me. Bridwell leaned toward him and murmured something. Marcus nodded once tight and looked at me across the table.
Quite a production, Dom.
Still performing, still trying.
You always did like to make an entrance.
I said nothing. Simone opened the meeting with procedural language, the Asset Preservation Order, the scope of discovery, the formal record being established. Marcus and Bridwell listened with the body language of people expecting a negotiation they believe they can win. Then Simone said,
Before we proceed to asset disclosure, I need to present additional evidence that has been filed with this court and separately transmitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina.
Bridwell straightened. What additional evidence we were not informed of?
You are being informed now.
Simone said pleasantly and opened the first folder. She walked through it the way a surgeon works, precise, unhurried. The Alexa skill, its architecture, its registration date, its function, its registration to CN Advisory Group, LLC, the network traffic logs showing 26 months of continuous transmission, the audio fragments, the cross-referenced calendar showing which conversations had been captured and when, the forensic chain of custody documentation I had prepared to evidentiary standard. Marcus's face did not change during the first folder. His jaw was set and his eyes were steady, and he had the look of a man concentrating very hard on maintaining a specific expression. Then Simone opened the second folder, Kezia's financial analysis, $61,000. The CN Advisory Group business account, the payments to the software developer, the cloud storage service, the personal branding firm, the timeline showing the systematic transfer of marital funds to build Priya Nair's professional profile. And then Simone said the words that I had been waiting 2 months to hear spoken aloud in a room with witnesses.
Mr. Carter, the funds used to finance CN Advisory Group's operations, including the software development of the surveillance tool installed in the marital home, were drawn entirely from the joint marital account, which means your wife's savings were used to build the system used to surveil her. Her money paid for the tool used to steal her career.
The color left Marcus Carter's face. Not gradually, all at once. like someone had reached behind him and turned off a switch. The warm brown of his skin went gray in a way I had never seen on a living person before, and I have thought about it since then, and I still do not have a better way to describe it than that: a light going out. His hands, which had been resting flat and still on the conference table with great deliberate control, began to tremble. Small at first, then visible. Then he pressed them palm down on the table, and the trembling transferred to his forearms. Bridwell was speaking rapidly in his ear. Marcus was not hearing him. Simone opened the third folder. Attorney Voss from Meridian took over, her voice measured and impersonal. The internal investigation findings, the CISO selection process, the documented instances in which information originating from recorded conversations in the marital home had been used by Priya Nair in presentations, proposals, and interviews over an 18-month period. The committee's preliminary determination that the selection process had been compromised and its outcome was under formal review. Marcus looked at Priya. Priya looked at the table.
You signed,
he said. His voice came out wrong, thinner than he intended, cracked at the edges like old wood under pressure.
Priya, you signed?
She said nothing. Her attorney put a hand briefly on her arm.
You signed,
he said again, louder, and the crack in his voice opened wider. The same voice that had told me I did not have the stomach for this. The same voice that had said, "So what are you going to do about it?" Cracking now, splitting along lines that had always been there, that confidence and control had always papered over. Bridwell said something sharp and low. Marcus stopped. Then Simone opened the fourth folder, and she slid it across the table toward Marcus and Bridwell without speaking. I will tell you what was in it. It was a letter from the U.S. Attorney's Office confirming the opening of a preliminary investigation into potential violations of the Federal Wiretap Act and the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. It named Marcus Darnell Carter as the subject of the investigation. It named CN Advisory Group, LLC, as a related entity under review. A federal investigation, not a civil filing, not a divorce proceeding, a federal investigation. Bridwell picked up the letter, read it, set it down, and for the first time since they had walked into that room, said nothing at all. Marcus's hands were shaking so badly now that when he reached for the letter, his fingers knocked it sideways. He grabbed it with both hands, read it. I watched his eyes move across the page, and I watched the moment, the precise, specific moment, when the full weight of what he was looking at arrived in his body. His shoulders dropped, not slumped, dropped like something structural had given way. His jaw unclenched and then clenched again, and his throat moved in a swallow that looked like it cost him something. I had waited 2 months for this moment. I want to be honest with you, I had imagined it many times. I had thought it would feel like triumph, like fire, like something loud and righteous. It felt like none of those things. It felt like standing at the end of a very long road and finally being able to stop walking. Simone looked at me. I nodded once. I looked at Marcus Carter across the table, and I spoke for the first time since he had walked into that room. You told me I was just a woman alone in a smart house that didn't know her. I said, you were wrong. That house knew everything. It was just waiting for me to ask the right questions. He opened his mouth. I continued. You told me nobody at my company respects me, that they just tolerate me. I let that sit for a moment. Gerald Huang offered me the CISO position 4 days ago, effective the 1st of next month. I accepted. The sound Marcus made was not a word. It was something that had started as a word and collapsed before it could form. You told me I didn't have the stomach for this. I said, I want you to look around this room and tell me again. He did not look around the room. He looked at the table. What followed was procedural, and I will not make it dramatic because it was not dramatic. It was paperwork and legal language and the grinding, impersonal machinery of consequence doing exactly what it is designed to do. The asset preservation order was enforced immediately. Marcus's access to the joint accounts was revoked on the spot. Bridwell advised him to stop speaking, which he did, because there was nothing left to say that would help him. At some point, I do not remember exactly, when Marcus looked up from the table and across at me and said very quietly,
Dom, please, I'm sorry. I'll fix it. Whatever you need me to do, I'll do it. Please.
The please sounded like it hurt him. Good. I picked up my pen and looked at him with the same calm I had been practicing for 2 months. You're not sorry, Marcus, I said. You're sorry you got caught. There is a difference. You taught me that. I looked back down at the documents in front of me and I kept working. He had nothing left to say, so he said nothing. 3 months later, Marcus Carter was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Gastonia, 45 minutes outside Charlotte, because he could not afford Charlotte rents without access to assets that were frozen pending investigation. His financial advisor license had been suspended by the North Carolina Secretary of State's office during the federal inquiry. 3 clients had terminated their contracts within 2 weeks of the story becoming known in professional circles because financial services runs entirely on trust, and Marcus Carter had none left. Priya Nair had quietly resigned from Meridian and relocated. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had gone back to be near family. I did not wish her well, and I did not wish her harm. I simply did not think about her much at all. The Alexa routine I had scheduled, the one I had pressed confirm on in the parking garage, had activated the previous Saturday morning, while Marcus was home alone. At exactly 9 a.m., every speaker in the house had chimed once, and then Alexa had spoken in that cheerful, unbothered voice. Good morning. Just a reminder, the asset preservation order filed in Mecklenburg County covers all accounts, properties, and financial instruments held jointly or individually by Marcus Darnell Carter. Have a great day. I had set that up 3 weeks earlier. A small thing, perhaps petty. I do not regret it even slightly. 6 months after that Friday morning on the 14th floor, I woke up on a Saturday in April to the sound of rain on the roof of the house on Delwood Drive. Not an alarm, not a notification, not Alexa telling me the weather because I had asked her to. Just rain. The real kind, the slow, steady kind that Charlotte does in spring when the air smells like wet earth and new grass and something that has no name but feels like permission. I lay there for a few minutes and I just listened. That was new. The ability to simply lie still in my own home and listen to the rain without some part of my mind running a background scan, checking for anomalies, cataloging small, cold moments, bracing for the next thing. For 2 years, I had lived in a state of low-grade alertness that I had not even recognized as alertness because it had become indistinguishable from normal, like a smoke detector that has been beeping so long you stop hearing it as an alarm and start hearing it as silence. That Saturday morning in April, for the first time in longer than I could precisely calculate, the beeping had stopped. I got up. I made coffee. I took it out to the wraparound porch, and I sat in the same chair I had sat in on 100 Saturday mornings with Marcus, and I let myself feel the difference. The difference was enormous. The difference was everything. Let me tell you what the 6 months had looked like. The divorce was finalized in February, 4 months after the filing, faster than average, because Marcus had no viable legal ground to stand on, and Bridwell was too experienced to advise him to waste money fighting a battle whose outcome was already determined. The marital home on Delwood Drive remained mine. The joint accounts were unfrozen and redistributed according to the court's asset division order, which took into account the $61,000 in documented dissipation. I came out of the financial settlement in a position that was not what it would have been if none of this had happened. 2 years of theft does real damage, but it was solid. It was mine. And it was a foundation I knew how to build on, because I had built on less before. The federal investigation was ongoing. I had been told by Simone, who maintained her contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office, that the wiretapping case was progressing and that Marcus remained the primary subject. I will not tell you the outcome of that investigation because as of the time I am telling you this story, it has not concluded. What I will tell you is that Marcus Carter's financial advisor license remained suspended, that his professional reputation in Charlotte was not recoverable, and that the man who had once told me he did not need to ride on my coattails was building nothing at all in a one-bedroom apartment 45 minutes from the city, where he had thought he was untouchable. The CISO position was mine as of the 1st of December. Gerald Huang's apology, when it finally came in full, was genuine and specific, and included an acknowledgement that the concerns raised about my communications during the selection process had originated from an anonymous tip that the internal investigation had since traced back to CN Advisory Group's domain, which is to say Marcus and Priya had not just stolen information from my home, they had also actively poisoned my professional reputation with my own employer using that information. Gerald sat across from me in his office and said,
"We should have asked you directly. We didn't. That's on us, and I am sorry."
I accepted the apology. I accepted the position. I walked into my new office on a Monday morning in December, and I sat down at a desk that had my name on the door, and I thought about my mother who had worked double shifts for 22 years and told me my brain was my inheritance. Mama, I thought, look what I did with it. I need to tell you about the house, because the house matters as much at the end of this story as it did at the beginning. 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I reset the entire smart home system from scratch. Not because I was afraid of what was in it, I had swept it thoroughly multiple times with equipment I trusted, but because I needed the ritual of it, the deliberate act of starting over. I went through every device, every integration, every permission setting and network connection and automated routine. I rebuilt it the way I had built it the first time before Marcus, before any of it methodically, carefully, with full knowledge of every wire and every signal. I gave every device a new name. I changed every password. I established a new encrypted network with new credentials that existed nowhere except in my memory. And when it was done, I stood in the middle of my living room and I said, "Alexa, good morning." She chimed once warm and unbothered. "Good morning, Dominique. It's 58 degrees in Charlotte and mostly sunny. You have no scheduled appointments today." No scheduled appointments. A whole open Saturday with nothing in it but whatever I chose to put there. I started crying, not from sadness, from the specific relief of a thing being over that you were not sure at its worst points was ever going to be over. Kezia came over that afternoon. We sat on the porch with wine, even though it was technically too cold for porch wine, which we both agreed was irrelevant. She did not say much for a long time. Then she said, "I told you something was off about him. You told me once and then left it alone like you said you would." I said, "That is the correct way to be a best friend, and I want you to know I recognize that." She raised her glass. I raised mine. "To leaving it alone," she said. "To knowing when not to." I said, "My brother DeAndre drove up from Raleigh the weekend after the system reset. He helped me repaint the living room a deep, warm terracotta that I had been wanting since I first bought the house and had never gotten around to because there was always something else. We painted for 6 hours and talked about everything and nothing the way we used to when we were kids, and the world was smaller and simpler, and I knew who I could trust. At one point, he stopped rolling paint and looked at me and said, "Dom, I should have listened to my gut about him from the beginning. I let him talk me into thinking you were the problem, and I will never forgive myself for that." I looked at my brother, this man who had driven 2 hours without being asked, who had shown up with painter's tape and a roller and no questions. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." He nodded. We kept painting. "I want to talk to you directly for a moment. Not as Dominique, the IT security analyst, not as the woman whose Alexa ordered a coffin and whose smart home turned out to be a surveillance system. Just as a woman who has been through something and come out the other side with a few things she knows for certain. I used to think that being smart protected you. That expertise was armor. That if you understood systems well enough, you could not be compromised by them. I was wrong about that. In the most personal way a person can be wrong about something. The most sophisticated intrusion I ever faced did not come through a firewall. It came through a front door I opened myself. It wore a warm smile and remembered how I took my coffee and stood at an altar and swore on something sacred. But here's what I also know. The same intelligence that was used against me was the thing that ultimately freed me. The same skills that made me a target made me dangerous when I finally decided to use them on my own behalf. And the exact moment when I stopped trying to protect the marriage and started protecting myself, was the moment everything changed. If you are listening to this and something in your house feels wrong, I mean that, in whatever way it lands for you, literally or otherwise, trust that feeling. You are not paranoid. You are not unstable. You are not imagining things. You are a person whose instincts are trying to tell you something that your love or your fear or your hope has been talking you out of hearing. Listen, that is all. Just listen. My name is Dominique Reeves Carter. I am 38 years old. I am the Chief Information Security Officer of Meridian Financial Group. I am the woman who built a smart home, lost it to someone else's agenda, and built it back better on her own terms. I am not what was done to me in that house. I am what I chose to do about it. And on a Saturday morning in April, when the rain comes slow and steady, and the porch chair holds me, and the coffee is hot, and the only voice in my home is the one I put there myself, I am finally and completely home. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever had to rebuild something that someone else broke on purpose. Tell me if you are in the middle of it right now, because I want you to know that the other side exists, and it is worth every hard step to get there. If this is your first time here, please subscribe. There are more stories coming, and every one of them is about women who refuse to stay down. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That matters more than you know.